A lot has happened over the last 50 years. In 1969 on the world stage, Neil Armstrong made one small step for man, one giant step for mankind, when Apollo 11 landed on the moon. Golda Meir was sworn in as the first female Prime Minister of Israel. Woodstock Music and Art Fair opened in the New York State. And in 1969 in Australia, a vast many Australians wanted our troops withdrawn from the Vietnam War. Poseidon shares hit $200. Balmain beat South in the Rugby League Grand Final, and in the VFL Grand Final, Richmond beat Carlton in front of 119,000 fans. And here, our spiritual home, our new little flower church Kedron, was officially opened and blessed by Archbishop O'Donnell. The 50th anniversary celebration video is about our church in Kedron, how it was and how it's changed. It's about the community of people who faithfully worship in this beautiful place. It's about our treasured Franciscan priests and nuns who've ministered to us over the years in the tradition of St. Francis. We tell our stories, both funny and moving. We tell of the pastoral nature of our community members, and we honour all of those magnificent women and men who've gone before us, having made such a difference to the very fabric of this parish, made us who we are. And we thank the Lord for his blessings as we look ahead to the next 50 years.
So you came to Mass because if you didn't come to Mass and you were run over by a runaway tram, you go to hell. That was the old mentality, you know, the sort of. So you came out of a sort of almost force. Now people don't tend to believe it, and I think they come more as a personal motivation. I want to come to worship with this community. So I see that's been a big change.
We had a lot of changes after Vatican, being pre-Vatican, you know, with Latin, and we knew all the Gregorian chants we used to sing in various parts, and then all this change, you know, the vernacular and priest facing the other way, and that. So it was a very traumatic period for the whole church.
But I understand why the new church had to happen, because the old church just was breaking at the seams, because the population had grown so much, the schools had grown, Padua and Mount Alvernia, so there were many more people in the area.
And of course there was people who said, oh, why are we pulling down the old church, why can't we? And when you see now how many people go, you did need the bigger church. You see, but in those early days, like before they built this new church, they had about 5 or 6 masses every Sunday. The old church just would not have been adequate, so you can see why Father Brendan thought a good idea, you know, to do this new one.
Actually, in that way, we were fairly lucky coming into a newly built church. Although we'd already had the changes before that, but it helped. Having a new church helped people accept the changes.
It was a working class parish. Sort of started in the 1920s, so that would have been post-War One. Then they had the Depression. People in those days had 9, 10 children, 11 children. So, I mean, there wasn't a lot of money. Even in my first year class, Sister Quentin, she had us in prep, and there was 104, I think, in our class, and one nun. But because Vatican II came in the 60s, so the whole structure of the church changed. I mean, I was used to a Latin Mass when I was growing up until the 60s. I remember the old one being pulled down. I remember the final Mass we had before the other one was pulled down.
People who are willing to volunteer, and volunteers are a big part of any church, a big part of this church.
Frank McCall, MCCOLL, Dick Akers, Leo Shields. There's a lot of great men that were very much involved in the parish.
Daphne Cumner. Daphne has just done so much for this parish.
Sister Margaret Rubenak, who has worked in the parish for many, many years. She was a close friend and collaborator with Jill Underwood, the first secretary, who was known as Girl Friday. But Sister Margaret has walked around the parish, and she would know every street. She would know many, many people within the parish.
But Alice Griffin had the chicken and chooks there, didn't he? Had all the chooks there. You asked what was there. It was the chook yard.
It was Irish's Paddy's Puddings.
I can't remember chooks. What ones did he have?
There was no transport. They didn't have a car or anything like that. And he couldn't drive anyway. And I can remember he used to take communion to the sick on a horse that was half a Clydesdale, really.
Father Hugelin, not many people probably remember him, but he was just so lovely and so welcoming and made such a fuss for family members. It made it a lovely day, you know.
And Hugelin, and Hugelin was in Padua College and then came back in the parish. Right.
Little Father Hugelin, Big Brother Clem.
Big Brother Clem.
Very close to 7 feet tall for a start. He used to run the altar service with an iron fist. Very keen on cricket. Yeah, he was quite a character around the place. I remember once he took a bad turn and the ambulance came and he was put into the ambulance. In those days the ambulance was just a long thing, the door that came up the back. Everybody was holding their breath that they'd be able to close the door.
Oh, and I remember at Corpus Christi, everyone would kneel at one stage and think, why isn't that priest kneeling? And then you look over and think, he is kneeling, and when he stands up.
And even Father John Boyd Boland, a great orator, and I can remember when he got a standing ovation after a sermon.
I've often said to the friars, I've said, has anyone ever complained that your sermons are too short? Because I've had some people complain that your sermons are too long.
Father Odrick, who ran the music for, 20 years.
He was principal of
Padua,
Little Padua at the time. He conducted the choir in the 1988 televised Mass.
Father Frank O'Brien, I feel, did more to unite the parish than any of the others. See, when he volunteered, his policy was many people doing a little can achieve much.
Yes. He took away the altar railings, and that nearly caused the biggest ruckus. Kitty McClernand, who was the Archbishop's secretary and a member of this parish, she said, I am not going to communion anymore if you take away those altar rails.
He was very post-Vatican II and enthusiastic and interesting to speak with, and I really enjoyed his, as he was parish priest.
And he was responsible for building the Portiuncula,
yes,
where the car wash is down there, and that used to be the Pizza Hut after. And so he was responsible for building that. And that allowed parishioners, you could say, on the other side of Gympie Road to come to Mass.
Well, we had a fella called Bill Eccles. And Bill was a pretty big man, wore big heavy rimmed glasses, and he used to take up the collection plates on a Sunday and did it for as long as I ever remember. And when I was a kid, my mother couldn't figure out who I was speaking about, but I was telling her about the man who owned the church. And that's how I describe Bill Eccles.
Yeah. Many people would remember him. He was the usher. Because the little church was so small, he organised where you should sit. And I think he still did a bit of that when the new church was open.
Late 80s or early 90s, Father Peter Clifford was here, and he called a general ideas night. And I remember the hall was packed. Things came out of that meeting that revitalised.
Father Peter was probably entirely different. I think he was a late vocation. I think he was a chemist, and he used to tell us stories of his 80-year-old mother, still playing the organ in church, and real family things that we could identify with,
It was Father Peter that came up to me one day and just said, oh, you're going to be a Eucharistic minister. And I said, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. No way. I just couldn't do that. He said, yes. He said, you're a Eucharistic minister. So that was it. And I've been a Eucharistic minister since.
So just for a moment, let's speak to Jesus in the stillness of our hearts.
I think it's about after 9:30 Mass one Sunday. Father Peter was still here. We're outside and a little brown staffy walks through the hospitality area. I said, look, Father Peter, look, that's a Franciscan in drag. But he laughed.
Have you heard of Michael Stark?
Oh, yeah, we were actually interviewing her.
Oh, great. Well, tell him that I said that he's an eccentric. He's involved Sunday Mass. He does different jobs around the place, including data projection and collecting. But he's always got jokes. And he's just a backstop, If the job needs to be done, he'll quietly do it. So I don't like his jokes. I think they're terrible.
Father Brendan Rogers, who was the parish priest at the time, was known as Brendan the Builder, and he used to walk around every afternoon smoking his pipe and inspecting all the progress that had been made, and if he wasn't satisfied, he would let the workmen know about that, and he would say things like, take that brick out.
Father Brendan used to come out onto the side veranda, and he'd stand there and he'd look out all over the Kedron, and he'd look a grumpy old thing, and he'd say to him, morning, Father Brendan. Lovely day, Father Brendan. But he was grinning, half grinning all the time he said it. I think he knew he was this character.
All the planning that went on with this church, and people at the time criticised about the size of the church, and yet I see he was a man of great vision, because look at the size of the church, and we've never had to add to it like many other parishes did. He built for the future, and he could see that this parish was going to be a big parish.
Airy, so roomy as you walk in. So many people that have come to it that are not from this parish have mentioned what a lovely church it is, Catholics, non-Catholics. And you couldn't imagine what it would be like in the beginning, you know, until it was finished. And as you see today, it's a wonderful, wonderful structure.
I think the influence of Vatican II is felt here. This is one of the churches, would have been one of the first churches built after Vatican II.
And even the positioning and shape of the pews at the left and right hand side, where they're at the angle, you can actually see a lot of fellow congregation. Whereas in the past it was a long thin rectangle, you saw the back of the head in front of you, and that was it. And so that was coming out of the Vatican II of community in the vernacular, celebrating together as the body of Christ. And I think that this reflects that well, and it stood up the test of time.
It has,
I mean, some churches that were built post-Vatican are outdated because they didn't encompass the real spirit. I think this one has maintained that.
I see his blood upon the rose, and in the stars the glory of his eyes. His body gleams amid eternal snows. His tears fall from the skies. I see his face in every cloud, the thunder and the singing of the birds. Oh, what is wise and kind.
Built and it was all blessed, but it got an architectural award for the best natural lighting. Can you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. I'm not telling, not making rumours. Yeah.
I like it because it's open and we've let our type of climate where we live into the ground. Like all old churches were dark and the windows were about that wide and always dark. Whereas this is what we live in, this is our climate, so that more churches have gone this way.
So those massive changes of the people being part of the community, not just the priest here and the congregation there. So you're right, the airiness, the way that the pews are shaped is an inclusive nature. And so that would have been one of the things that would have been discussed in the parish too, because some people might have wanted the good old days of the earlier church, and Vatican II was great for some, but for the elderly, they found some of those changes difficult. So I imagine coming to grips with a new style of church and a new style of celebration of the liturgy could have been a challenge for some.
Yes. And of course they have to, when they're building a church, you know, there are certain criteria that have to be followed in building a church. Now, where the altar's placed, what it looks like. You know, everything is really planned and is set down.
The grotto out there has never changed, has it? No. It's always been there. That's right. Our Lady of St Bernadette. Yeah. That's lasted through all the building and all the development on the property. And now it's even nicer now that it's part of the columbarium out there. That's
Yes, originally there was to be a choir loft at the back where that mosaic is up there, but of course after Vatican II, no choir lofts anymore. The choir had to move to the front. So what exactly is up there in that space, I have no idea. Yes.
I just think it's very inclusive because it is so open, and yet it kind of envelops you because you've got these lovely windows around you. So that lets the light in, which is most important, and it has its own simplicity. And yet these stained glass windows are absolutely beautiful. The Stations of the Cross are lovely. I think they're very well placed and very simple. You go to some churches and their Stations of the Cross are very ornate. But these stations, I suppose, really reflect the simplicity of design.
And the Franciscan simplicity.
Yes, and it has a warm feeling for me.
This church, this present church, as a memorial church, and there is a plaque saying that out in the column, and from that time the church had dual patronage of Saint Therese and Saint Anthony.
If you remember the criticism there was
Yes.
when Brendan Roger built that big memorial out there, of getting higher and higher, in memory of all those that have lost their lives. He'd been a prisoner of war.
Yes, that's
and
right.
he understood what all those men and how many lives had been lost.
It meant that he could, all the parishioners could claim their contributions to the church as tax deductions, and that was the whole point of making it a war memorial church.
He'd hear them say, "Here comes Grumpy again," and he virtually supervised every brick here.
That church, when they built it, I think was $118,000 it cost, which is not a lot of money today, but I'm pretty sure that was the figure that they that it was 175 and $118,000 mortgage had to be paid off. So they had a fair bit of, they had obviously around about a $50,000 deposit, so they had to pay off that debt, and that was always a concern. It was always a speaking point that the priests used to, and the servants on a Sunday, and then they instigated the fixed giving with the envelopes, that system.
I think when visitors come, the first thing they notice are the lovely grounds And I think that reflects our Franciscanism in that the natural world is a real value here.
Multicultural gatherings. There were a couple of times when we had a street festival, which was an outreach to the wider community.
Gospel discussions in the hall. We've had prayer groups.
Meals on Wheels
and
All
Author
Society.
Society. In recent years, they've had the garage sale organised by Joe Galvin.
Now, I don't think parishes have dances these days, but
Not anymore.
no, but we used to have very good dances every Sunday night with a full-blown band, and the band they used to use with the Cavaliers from Redcliffe usually.
I like the fun bowls, barefoot bowls that we had just recently. I was one of the oldies who went along.
Brother Gerard Davis had the Franciscan Mission. We were with, Bill and I worked with Brother Gerard on that for quite a number of years.
And they used to run fetes and the bottle drives and any way they could get a quid, which they needed to keep the parish mobile.
Along the way, there's been some really good youth groups and the priests that come in. So it all depends, I think, on who the priests are and who are on the committees. And
it's their first Holy Communion here, and it's always good to see little kids come to church, especially on those occasions when they're all dressed up and they look so beautiful in their clothes, and parents are so proud of them.
A number of my grandchildren have been baptised here. My daughters were married here.
All my family wanted to be married here because it's such a lovely church for weddings. There's weddings all the time.
Yes, they're able to drive in. I think that's a very big, it's a very big feature people like.
I think one of the challenges that the parish is facing is in terms of the manpower of the Franciscans. There are fewer joining the order, and those who are in the order are getting older, so manning this parish is going to be a challenge for the future. And I'd like to think that it will always be a Franciscan parish next to a Franciscan school.
I think there's one thing the Franciscans do badly, and that is promote themselves. Because they have but that's the beauty of St Francis, that he did not promote himself, and yet what he did was so fantastic. And so other people say, we've done this and we've done that, and you think, the Franciscans have done that too, it's just that we didn't jump up and shout about it. I think that lovely, quiet, unassuming nature is a lovely thing too.
Fullness too. You see the same people again and again and again. You've got some wonderful people.
The people are very down to earth and friendly. The friars and the sisters have always been very welcoming. So that builds up bonds in a community.
Females were allowed to do altar serving, and that we could go past the altar rail that used to be in the church there.
So that's the triumph of the church, that it goes on and on, in no matter what form it is. Things have changed over the years, we've evolved.
The number of priests have been going down for years, and that has caused a lot of anxiety in the parish. But I also think that it's brought the parish together, and it's given the parish, the laity of the parish, more say in the parish and more confidence to come forward and do what they think the parish needs.
So you just feel as if you're coming home. And I think that's, for me, that's important.
We can't call this the Little Flower anymore because the Little Flower belongs in Bribey. The Bribey Catholic Church is called the Church of the Little Flower.
Really?
So we have to say the Church of St. Teresa and St. Anne's, which is a big mouthful, but
it is.
That's the way history's gone.
Yeah.
So what of the future? The next 50 years? We certainly hope the Franciscan presence is on our journey will continue. Our history as a parish has always been one of helping our neighbour, being present to those in need. In those troubled times of the Church, the Kedron community needs our resilience, preparedness and generosity to strengthen the bonds of the Church. Pope Francis contemplates the holiness present in the patience of God's people. We are called to be holy by living our lives with love and bearing witness in everything we do, wherever we find ourselves, and in the ordinariness of our lives. By this definition, our Kedron parish is home to a great many holy men and women. Truly, our future in Kedron is a shared one and very much in our hands. May God bless us all, and until we meet again, may He hold us in the palm of His hand.